Nobody move until she tells you what to do. The command echoed across the training field, and every rookie soldier froze in stunned silence as Captain Hannah Brooks knelt beside a young trainee who had collapsed during a demanding field exercise. There was no panic in her voice, no dramatic gestures, only calm confidence built from years of experience that nobody around her had recognized until that very moment. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins stepped back without saying a word, allowing Hannah to take complete control of the situation while dozens of nervous eyes watched every decision she made. The loudest soldiers from earlier that morning now stood speechless, waiting for instructions from the very officer they had mocked only hours before. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Captain Hannah Brooks. 6 hours earlier, the morning sun had barely climbed above the pine trees surrounding Fort Adams Training Center. The crisp air carried the sound of boots striking pavement as a new class of rookie soldiers hurried across the parade ground toward their first week of advanced combat lifesaver instruction. Most of them expected a grizzled veteran with a booming voice and broad shoulders to greet them. Instead, they saw a woman standing quietly beside a folding table covered with neatly organized medical equipment. Captain Hannah Brooks adjusted a stack of training manuals before checking every tourniquet, bandage, and emergency kit with careful precision. Her uniform was immaculate but well-worn, the fabric carrying the subtle signs of years spent in service rather than behind a desk. She never looked rushed. She never tried to impress anyone. She simply prepared. A few of the rookies exchanged amused glances. One whispered, "She looks too nice for this place." Another chuckled, "Maybe she teaches paperwork." A third laughed quietly, "I bet she has never seen a real emergency." Their comments spread through the group until several soldiers were smiling before the first lesson had even begun. Hannah heard every word. She continued arranging supplies exactly as before, never raising her head, never allowing their opinions to interrupt her work. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins approached from the opposite side of the training field, carrying a clipboard. He noticed the laughter immediately. His eyes shifted from the rookies to Hannah, but instead of correcting anyone, he folded his arms and watched. Experience had taught him that respect earned naturally lasted much longer than respect demanded. Hannah finally looked up and offered the class a polite smile. "Good morning," she said evenly. "Today is not about proving who is strongest. It is about learning how to help someone return home." Several rookies nodded politely, but others still struggled to hide their skepticism. One young private quietly muttered, "This is going to be the easiest week of training." Ethan glanced toward the speaker, then back at Hannah. She simply picked up the first medical kit, invited everyone closer, and began the lesson with the same calm professionalism that had guided her entire career, while none of the young soldiers realized they were standing only a few feet away from one of the most experienced lifesavers the Army had ever produced. Captain Hannah Brooks moved through the first lesson with the same steady rhythm she had used throughout her career. Every medical pouch rested exactly where it should. Every demonstration followed a clear sequence. She never rushed a step because she believed people remembered calm far longer than speed. The rookies gathered around a row of training mannequins, some paying close attention while others exchanged quiet jokes behind her back. One private nudged another with a grin. "I thought advanced military training would be tougher than this." Another replied, "Maybe they wanted someone who makes everyone feel comfortable." A few chuckles spread through the group. Hannah continued explaining how to evaluate a teammate before offering assistance, speaking with a calm voice that never rose above the noise. She invited volunteers to repeat the procedure exactly as she had demonstrated. The first few attempts were rushed. Hands moved too quickly. Important steps were skipped. Hannah never criticized anyone. She simply smiled, reset the equipment, and asked them to try again. "Confidence is helpful," she said. "Consistency saves more people." Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins remained near the edge of the training lane, quietly observing both the instructor and the students. Several of the rookies noticed he had not laughed once that morning. One finally walked over and asked, "Sergeant, have you worked with the captain before?" Ethan answered with a simple nod. Long enough to know she never teaches anything she has not done herself. The young soldier looked surprised. She does not really seem like someone with a long operational background. Ethan looked toward Hannah before answering. That is because you are looking for the wrong things. The comment lingered in the air, but before anyone could ask another question, Hannah called the class back together. She divided the soldiers into pairs and instructed them to complete a timed casualty assessment using only the equipment inside their standard training kits. The rookies attacked the exercise with enthusiasm, but many focused on finishing first rather than following the proper sequence. Hannah walked quietly from team to team, making small corrections without embarrassing anyone. Slow your breathing, she reminded one soldier. Look before you move. To another she said, do not assume. Verify. Every sentence was short, practical, and delivered without frustration. As the morning continued, even the most confident recruits realized the exercise demanded far more concentration than they had expected. Small mistakes multiplied. Important details were overlooked. Meanwhile, Hannah noticed every misstep almost immediately. Ethan watched the class gradually lose its early confidence. He had seen this pattern before. New soldiers often believed strength solved every problem until they discovered that discipline and observation mattered even more. Near the end of the session, Hannah placed one final training scenario on the field. The equipment looked ordinary, but the sequence required every lesson they had practiced that morning. Several rookies exchanged confident smiles, certain they would finally prove themselves. Ethan folded his arms again and quietly stepped aside. He already knew what was coming, and he also knew that before the day ended, every person standing on that field would remember Captain Hannah for a reason none of them could yet imagine. The final exercise appeared almost ordinary at first glance. A training mannequin rested beneath a camouflage shelter while medical bags, radios, and standard field equipment were scattered across the lane exactly as they might be during a demanding exercise. Captain Hannah stood quietly beside a stopwatch without raising her voice. This assessment is not about finishing first, she said. It is about noticing what others miss. The rookies exchanged confident smiles. Most of them believed they had already mastered the morning lessons. One by one, the team stepped forward. The first pair rushed directly toward the mannequin, eager to impress everyone watching. They immediately reached for the medical supplies without checking their surroundings. Hannah allowed them to finish before gently asking a single question. Did either of you notice the damaged radio? Both soldiers looked back in confusion. Neither had seen it. The second team moved more carefully, but they overlooked an empty medical pouch placed only a few feet away. The third group completed nearly every step correctly before forgetting to communicate with each other. Hannah nodded politely after each attempt, offering practical advice without raising her voice or criticizing anyone personally. Observation, she reminded them, always comes before action. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins watched the exercise from the edge of the field. Several instructors from neighboring training lanes had quietly gathered nearby, curious to see the newest class complete the scenario. Ethan noticed that the laughter from earlier had completely disappeared. The rookies were beginning to understand that every small detail mattered. One private wiped perspiration from his forehead and quietly admitted, I thought this would be easy. Another shook his head. I keep missing things that seem obvious after she points them out. Hannah heard the conversation, but continued preparing the final demonstration. Without saying a word, she walked through the lane exactly as the students had done moments earlier. She paused once, adjusted the position of a medical bag, secured a loose strap, acknowledged the damaged radio, verified every piece of equipment, and calmly explained each observation as though she were reading from a familiar checklist. Every movement had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. The demonstration lasted less than 3 minutes, yet every rookie immediately recognized how many details they had overlooked despite standing only a few feet away. Ethan smiled quietly. He had witnessed the same reaction countless times whenever Hannah taught new soldiers. Her greatest lesson had never been about equipment alone. It was about discipline, patience, and the willingness to slow down before making decisions. As the class gathered their supplies, one of the younger soldiers finally approached Ethan again. Sergeant, he asked softly, where did the captain learn to see things like that? Ethan looked across the training lane where Hannah was quietly repacking every medical kit herself instead of asking anyone else to do it. He answered with complete confidence. Years of serving other people before herself. The rookie frowned thoughtfully. Has she really been doing this that long? Ethan glanced toward Hannah once more before replying. Long enough that there are people walking with their families today because she never stopped paying attention. The young soldier stood silently, his earlier confidence replaced by genuine curiosity, while for the first time that day the class stopped seeing Captain Hannah Brooks as simply another instructor and quietly began wondering what kind of career could earn that level of respect. The afternoon sun settled high above the training grounds as Captain Hannah Brooks gathered the class for one final practical exercise before lunch. Instead of announcing another timed competition, she quietly rearranged several pieces of equipment across the field, creating a realistic training lane that required teamwork rather than speed. The rookies looked at one another with renewed confidence. After all, they had already completed 3 exercises that morning. Surely this one would be no different. Hannah stepped back and folded her hands behind her back. This scenario has only one rule, she said. Take care of the person before you think about yourself. Her words sounded simple, yet several soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. They had spent the morning trying to outperform one another. Now they were being asked to slow down and work together. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins walked toward the center of the field carrying a clipboard. You have 10 minutes, he announced. Use everything you have learned. The first team immediately divided responsibilities and moved into the exercise. One soldier focused entirely on the equipment while another began giving instructions without listening to anyone else. Hannah observed quietly without interrupting. When they finished, she thanked them and simply asked, "Did anyone ask for help?" The team looked at one another before slowly shaking their heads. Hannah nodded gently. Leadership begins with listening. The second group approached with more patience. They communicated clearly and checked each step together before moving forward. Their performance improved immediately. Ethan noticed the difference and allowed himself a small smile. The atmosphere across the training ground had changed. The laughter from the morning had been replaced by concentration. Even the soldiers who had joked the most now watched Hannah carefully whenever she demonstrated a technique or offered a suggestion. During the final rotation, one young private hesitated halfway through the exercise after noticing an important detail that everyone else had overlooked. Instead of guessing, he looked directly at Hannah and calmly explained what he had observed. Hannah smiled. "Excellent," she said. "You trusted your training instead of your assumptions." The words seemed to encourage the entire class. Soldiers who had rushed through earlier exercises now slowed their pace, communicated more clearly, and began helping one another instead of competing. Ethan quietly walked beside Hannah as the final scores were recorded. "They are starting to understand," he said. "Hannah, Luke." The lunch break ended quietly, but the atmosphere around the training grounds had changed in ways that every instructor could feel. Conversations were calmer. The easy laughter that had filled the morning had given way to thoughtful discussion as the rookies replayed every lesson in their minds. Captain Hannah Brooks arrived at the afternoon classroom carrying a weathered binder instead of another medical kit. She placed it gently on the front table and looked across the room with the same composed expression she had worn since sunrise. "This afternoon," she said, "we are going to talk about something every manual struggles to teach." The soldiers straightened in their seats. "Judgment," she continued. "Not judging a situation, judging people." The room became completely silent. Hannah slowly opened the binder and removed several anonymous case summaries with names and locations carefully covered. She handed copies to each table. "Read the first page," she instructed. "Tell me what kind of leader you think completed each mission." The rookies leaned over the papers, studying the reports. Every summary described someone who remained calm under pressure, organized limited resources, coordinated teammates, and helped bring people safely through extremely difficult circumstances. Without exception, the soldiers imagined the same person. "Probably an older special forces operator," one private answered. "Someone with 20 years of experience," another added. A third nodded confidently. "Definitely somebody physically intimidating." Hannah listened without interrupting. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins quietly walked to the front of the room, carrying another folder. He stood beside Hannah for a moment before looking toward the class. "Would any of you like to know who wrote those reports?" Every hand immediately went up. Ethan smiled slightly, then opened the folder. Every one of these reports documents the work of the same officer. He paused just long enough for the room to grow completely still. "Captain Hannah Brooks." Several rookies exchanged surprised glances. Ethan continued. These reports span many years of service. They include humanitarian deployments, disaster response operations, overseas medical support, domestic emergency assistance, and countless training missions. Together, they represent more successful life-saving interventions than anyone currently assigned to this installation. Nobody spoke. The same soldiers who had joked about Hannah that morning now looked down at the reports resting in front of them. The words suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Ethan quietly placed another document beside the binder. It listed commendations, instructor certifications, humanitarian awards, and letters of appreciation from military families whose loved ones had returned home because someone had refused to give up on them. Hannah never looked at the papers. She simply folded her hands and waited. Finally, the young private who had laughed the loudest during the morning slowly stood from his chair. His voice was quieter than anyone had heard all day. "Captain," he said, "I thought experience had a certain look. I was wrong." Hannah smiled gently, not with satisfaction, but with understanding. "Most people begin there," she replied. "The important part is deciding where you go after that." Ethan looked across the classroom and recognized something he had hoped the rookies would discover for themselves. Respect had finally entered the room, not because someone demanded it, but because truth had quietly replaced assumption. The classroom remained quiet long after Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins closed the final folder. No one reached for a notebook. No one whispered to the person beside them. The silence itself became part of the lesson. Captain Hannah Brooks slowly gathered the documents and placed them back inside the weathered binder that had traveled with her through countless assignments. She handled every page with the same care she had shown the training equipment that morning, never treating her accomplishments as trophies. Instead, they looked like reminders of responsibilities that had shaped her entire career. The young private who had apologized remained standing for another moment before speaking again. "Captain, why did you never tell us any of this?" Hannah looked at him with a warm but thoughtful expression. "Because my record is not the lesson," she answered. "What you choose to become after today is." Those words settled across the room more deeply than any speech could have. Ethan watched several rookies quietly lower their eyes, each remembering the careless comments they had made only hours earlier. One soldier slowly raised his hand. "How do you stay calm when everyone around you expects something different?" Hannah smiled gently. "You stop trying to meet expectations that are built on appearances. You focus on doing the next right thing, one decision at a time." Another rookie leaned forward. "Were you ever underestimated when you first started?" Hannah nodded once. "Many times. Every generation has people who judge too quickly. Every generation also has people willing to learn." Ethan stepped toward the front of the room and looked across the class. "That is why Captain Brooks teaches this course. Not because she has impressive records, because she has never allowed those records to become more important than the people sitting in front of her." Several instructors standing near the back quietly agreed. One of them had worked beside Hannah for years and had watched her volunteer for extra training sessions whenever new soldiers needed additional guidance. Another remembered seeing her spend an entire evening helping a struggling recruit pass a certification instead of going home early. None of those moments appeared on an official report, yet they revealed more about her character than any award ever could. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the classroom floor as the final minutes of instruction came to an end. Hannah closed the binder and looked around the room one last time. "Someday," she said, "someone will form an opinion about you before they know your story. Do not waste your energy trying to change their mind with words. Let your consistency do the talking." The rookies listened without moving. The same soldiers who had entered the classroom expecting another ordinary lesson now understood they had witnessed something far more valuable. Ethan dismissed the class, but no one hurried toward the door. One after another, the rookies stopped beside Hannah, thanked her for the lesson, and shook her hand with genuine respect. There were no dramatic speeches, no celebration, and no applause. There was only quiet gratitude earned through patience, humility, and years of faithful service. As Hannah switched off the classroom lights and stepped into the fading afternoon sun beside Ethan Collins, the training day finally came to an end, but the lesson each rookie carried with them was only beginning. The following morning arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze sweeping across the parade ground as the rookie class assembled earlier than scheduled without being asked. Something had changed overnight. Conversations that once centered on proving who was strongest now revolved around improving small details that Captain Hannah had patiently explained the day before. Boots were cleaned more carefully. Equipment was inspected twice instead of once. Soldiers quietly checked one another's gear before forming ranks, understanding that responsibility extended beyond themselves. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins noticed the difference immediately. He walked slowly down the line, studying faces that no longer carried the careless confidence of their first morning. Instead, he saw determination mixed with humility. When Captain Hannah stepped onto the training field carrying the same weathered medical bag, every rookie greeted her with a respectful, unified, "Good morning, Captain." Hannah paused for only a moment before returning the greeting with a warm smile. Nothing else needed to be said. Respect had arrived naturally. The day's lesson focused on teamwork under realistic training conditions. Hannah divided the class into small groups and assigned each team a series of practical tasks that required observation, communication, and patience. There were no prizes for finishing first and no penalties for asking thoughtful questions. Instead, every successful outcome depended on listening carefully and supporting one another. Ethan quietly watched from the edge of the field as the soldiers applied the lessons from the previous day. The same private who had once joked that the training would be easy now stopped his team before making a decision. "Let us verify everything first," he said calmly. Another rookie immediately agreed instead of arguing. Hannah noticed the exchange but continued observing without interrupting. She understood that real growth often appeared in the smallest habits. Throughout the morning, she offered occasional guidance, asking questions rather than giving immediate answers. "What do you notice?" she would ask. "What are you missing?" Every response encouraged the soldiers to think instead of simply react. As the final exercise ended, Ethan gathered the class beneath the shade of a large oak tree overlooking the training grounds. He looked toward Hannah before addressing the rookies. "Yesterday you learned medical procedures," he said. "Today you demonstrated something far more important. You learned that leadership begins with humility and that experience is not measured by appearance." Several soldiers nodded quietly. The young private who had apologized the previous afternoon stepped forward once more. "Captain," he said sincerely, "I hope one day I can teach someone with the same patience you showed us." Hannah smiled with genuine appreciation. "You already can," she replied. "Every time you choose encouragement over judgment, someone learns more than a manual could ever teach." Ethan watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. He had seen many classes complete this course over the years, but very few left carrying a lesson that would remain long after the training manuals were forgotten. As the rookies gathered their equipment and prepared for their next assignment, they no longer saw Captain Hannah as the quiet instructor they had underestimated. They saw a leader whose greatest achievement was not found in awards, records, or recognition, but in the countless lives she had influenced simply by serving others with consistency, compassion, and unwavering humility. Several weeks passed, and the lessons from Captain Hannah continued to shape the rookie class in ways that could not be measured by written evaluations alone. The training schedule became more demanding, yet the atmosphere among the soldiers remained noticeably different from the first day they had met. Whenever someone struggled with a new skill, another teammate stepped forward to help instead of criticize. Questions replaced assumptions. Patience replaced pride. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction as he reviewed each team's progress during their final week of instruction. One afternoon, the class gathered inside the same classroom where Ethan had first revealed Hannah's remarkable record of service. This time, however, there was no surprise waiting inside a weathered binder. Instead, Hannah placed a single blank sheet of paper on every desk. The soldiers exchanged curious looks before she spoke. "Write down the most important lesson you are taking with you," she said. "Do not write about equipment. Do not write about procedures. Write about character." The room became silent except for the sound of pencils moving across paper. Some soldiers wrote quickly. Others paused often, choosing each word with care. Ethan quietly walked between the rows without reading a single page. He knew the value of the exercise was not in grading answers, but in encouraging honest reflection. After several minutes, Hannah invited volunteers to share their thoughts. One rookie stood and read, "I learned that real confidence stays quiet because it does not need approval." Another smiled before saying, I learned to notice people before judging them. A third soldier folded his paper and looked directly at Hannah. I learned that someone can change your life without ever raising their voice. Hannah thanked each speaker with a simple nod. She never interrupted, never added to their words, and never redirected the conversation toward herself. The lesson belonged to the students now. Ethan stepped forward holding a small wooden challenge coin display that had been prepared for the graduating class. Each soldier received a simple coin engraved with the words service before self. As the rookies accepted them one by one, Ethan explained that the coin was not a reward for perfect performance, but a reminder that character should guide every decision they would make throughout their careers. Before dismissing the class, Hannah looked around the room one final time. Years from now, she said softly, you probably will not remember every lesson from this course. You may forget my name. You may even forget this classroom. But I hope you never forget how your first impression of someone can change after you choose to listen instead of assume. The rookies remained standing in respectful silence. The young private who had once laughed the loudest carefully slipped his challenge coin into his pocket before quietly thanking Hannah again. Ethan watched him walk away with a different posture than the one he had carried on the first morning. Confidence was still there, but now it was balanced by humility. As the afternoon sun settled across Fort Adams, Captain Hannah Brooks gathered her notes, picked up the same weathered medical bag, and walked toward the next group of soldiers waiting to learn, carrying with her the quiet understanding that the greatest victories are often measured not by recognition, but by the lives and attitudes that change long after the lesson has ended. SUA autumn arrived at Fort Adams with cooler mornings and golden leaves drifting across the parade ground, where another class of new soldiers assembled for the beginning of their own training journey. Captain Hannah Brooks walked toward the familiar field carrying the same weathered medical bag she had carried for years. Nothing about her appearance suggested extraordinary achievements. She greeted each recruit with the same calm smile, arranged the training equipment with the same careful precision, and quietly prepared for another day of teaching. Staff Sergeant Ethan Collins watched from a short distance before joining her. Another class, he said with a smile. Hannah nodded. Another opportunity. Ethan looked across the formation and noticed something that made him pause. Standing near the front of the new class was one of the rookies who had graduated several months earlier. He had returned as a junior assistant instructor after earning outstanding evaluations from his unit. Hannah recognized him immediately. Good morning, she said. The young soldier smiled respectfully. Good morning, Captain. Before the lesson began, Ethan invited him to address the incoming class for just a few minutes. The former rookie stood quietly in front of the formation and looked at the faces that reminded him of himself not very long ago. On my first day here, he began, I believed experience always looked a certain way. I judged people before I listened to them. I was wrong. The new recruits listened carefully. The greatest lesson I learned was not about medical training. It was about character. Someone showed me that quiet professionalism can change lives, and I hope every one of you leaves here understanding the same thing. Hannah never interrupted. She simply watched the young instructor finish his remarks before stepping forward to begin another course. Ethan leaned toward her and spoke softly. Looks like your lesson is still growing. Hannah smiled. That is how service is supposed to work. Someone teaches you. Then you teach someone else. Throughout the morning, the former rookie moved through the class exactly as Hannah once had, correcting mistakes with patience instead of criticism, encouraging careful observation instead of rushed decisions, and treating every question with respect. Ethan noticed several familiar habits that had been quietly passed from one generation to the next. The greatest compliment Hannah had ever received was not written on an award or displayed inside a frame. It lived in the character of the people she had helped shape. As the training day came to